So good day class. So this week we're going to discuss about SPP Document 201, which is part of the IRR or Implementing Rules and Regulations of Republic Act 9266. So for its introduction, so the basic services provided by the architect have remained relatively unchanged over the years. However, the architect must expand his services in response to the increasing demands of his or her clients, the evolution of new standards of regulated professional practice, the advancements of technology, and the enactment of new laws. Then 1.2, to be most advantageous to the client, to involve the architect in the earliest stages of the project, since the architect, if suitably experienced, can provide the client with objective project analysis, establishing parameters to provide building needs vis-a-vis available resources and attendant constraints. Okay, so take note, class, of the word here, if suitably experienced. That's why, class, um, in the program of architecture, you have your 5 year uh, um, term of study. After that, you have 2 years apprenticeship before you can take the board exam. But um, to be considered quite experienced, I think you need at least to be in practice for 10 years. Okay, so I would encourage your class to try to take your experience or experience new uh, technologies in design and construction outside the city. You go to the capital, Manila, or you go to other countries so that you'll be updated the latest design trends and with the latest construction technologies. Okay, so that you'll have the technical know-how when you you give advice to your clients and when you decide in your projects. But of course, after passing the board exam, you could always go to practice immediately if you so desire. Okay, so it will really depend upon you and what path are you going to take. But don't forget, class, that learning will never end in our profession. Okay, you have to keep on learning every day. So the scope of pre-design services. So when you say pre-design, pre-design services cover a broad line of architectural services ranging from initial problem identification to activities that would allow the architect to initially conceptualize an array of architectural and allied solutions. The pre-design services nominally include consultation, pre-feasibility studies, feasibility studies, site selection and analysis, site utilization and land use studies, architectural research, architectural programming, space planning, space management studies, value management, design brief preparation, promotional services, and other related activities. What I can share you, class, in my experience before I went to abroad back in from 2010 to 2012, what I did was I worked for a firm. Then what we do was conduct feasibility studies. So when we see a site here in Cagayan de Oro, what we do is study what's the best use for that property. Okay, so I'm working with some uh, people from the financial world, from the banks, accountants, from marketing and brokers. So we study what's the best business to put up in that area. Okay, then we base the size of the building relative to the data we gathered. Okay, so that's an example, class. How you do pre-designed services. So for consultation, so when a client calls upon the architect to give oral or written advice and direction, to attend conferences, to make evaluations and appraisals regarding a contemplated project and similar activities, the architect renders valuable inputs whether or not the client pursues the project. Okay? So it would really be up to the client class whether or not he or she will pursue the project. But if you're going to offer your consultation services, then you must be fairly remunerated for doing it. Okay? Then you have another is pre-feasibility studies. So these preliminary studies involve the procurement, analysis, and use of secondary information gathered for the project to aid the client in early decision making. So they represent the architect's initial assessment of a project soundness, allowing the client to promptly explore available, readily identifiable directions or options. Research, process, validated secondary data are generally used for such studies, whether in electronic or in print. Okay, so that's what you call the feasibility studies. Then we go to the feasibility studies, which would be the more detailed analysis of the project. So based on pre-feasibility studies, will determine the viability of a proposed development. The studies will set the project against present and future trends to forecast how it will perform over time. So this requires primary data gathering and analysis. Okay, so in feasibility studies class, in my experience, what we do was that we present to the client how many years their company will recover their initial investment. Okay, so you're going to present how much capital you're going to infuse in the project, then how many years it will take to recover them, then what are their options if they're going to take loans from banks. Then you have site selection and analysis. So this entails the formulation of site criteria, assistance to the client in site evaluation, as well as analysis to determine the most appropriate site for a proposed project or building program. Then you have site utilization and land use studies. So this includes the detailed analysis of the site involving the identification of a site's development potentials through the proper utilization of land. The analysis covers the context of the site as well as that of its surrounding environment and the development controls that apply to the site and its environs. Then you have what you call architectural research. So architectural research entails the conduct of primary and secondary researches and assembles facts used as basis for conclusion. Then what you have architectural programming. So this analytical problem-seeking process will lead to the statement and identification of both horizontal and vertical requirements in offering a solution. So it incorporates a space program with characterizations of the envisioned spaces such as ambience, cost, range, etc. Okay, so then you have what you call space planning. So in space planning, the architect determines the adequate size and appropriate configuration and assemblance for a proposed project in consideration of the use, allocation, and interface of spaces for given activities. Space planning is done mainly through primary data gathering such as interviews, consultations, interfaces, focus group discussions, space planning surveys, space audits, etc., and subsequent analysis, spatial layouts with stacking concepts, particularly for multi-story structures. Then you have space management studies, which is an analysis of the space requirements of the project based on organizational structure and functional setup, pinpoint linkages and interaction of spaces. So the formulation of the space program will serve as the basis for the development of the architectural plan or design. So I think class, you are already slowly being trained in this area in your design. So your space management studies, when you're doing the space diagram, bubble diagrams, when you determine the adjacencies of the different spaces, you're already engaging in some form in the space management studies. So you really have to polish that part class, that skill in design. Then you have value management. So this technique is applied in the cost management process to minimize the negative effect of simplified operations associated with many cost reduction programs. So the goal of value management is to achieve an unimpaired program at minimum cost. Thus, a plan, design, or system that has been successfully value managed will still satisfy the same performance criteria as costlier alternatives. So in value management class, I think in my experience, we call that value engineering. What we do is we analyze a space, then we try to look into how we can further maximize it, then what materials could be used to maximize the effectiveness of the space without spending too much. Okay, so that's what we do in value engineering, or another term is value management. Then you have a design brief preparation. So under design brief preparation, the architect states the project terms of reference that you are, including the concept, objectives, and the necessary requirements to bid out architectural services, whether public or private. Then what you have, you also have what you call promotional services. So projects may require promotional activities in order to develop and generate financial support and acceptance from governing agencies or from the general public. So, in such cases, the architect can act as the agent of the owner by producing and coordinating the additional activities necessary to complete the services. In all such activities, the architect must remain his professional status as the representative of the owner. So, in my experience, class, when I was working in the firm of one of my former professors here at USTP, what we did for promotional services was that we made a scale model of a certain university here in Cagayan de Oro. So, we added all our proposals, what we're going to do with this campus. Then we also did the campus in 3D for promotion so that they can entice more investors towards their institution. So that's what you do, class, when you do promotional services. And another thing is that when you do promotional services, it means also that you're going to help them uh, gain the materials you will use in their brochures, such as your perspectives or renderings or concepts for the project or undertaking. Now let's go into the manner of providing services. So after the initial meeting, conversation, correspondence with the client, the architect must submit his proposal for pre-designed services stating the following. So number one, the scope of work. Of course, you're going to detail what you're going to do in the project. Second is the manner of payment. Third, the owner's responsibilities. And the fourth, the other conditions of services. Okay, so don't forget, class, um, you have to really discuss with the owner about the manner of payment so that they can understand how they're going to proceed in engaging with you. Because if you don't discuss the manner of payment for professional services, chances are you will not get paid for the hard work that you have done. Okay, so you must really discuss this with the owner. Okay? Sometimes when you are a new architect or a new practitioner, um, you might get shy. But really, class, I hope that in your generation, when you discuss with your clients, you won't be you won't avoid the topic regarding the payment because it's really important. Okay, then 3.2, the architect can render services in any of the following ways. One, as an individual architect, he must have special training and be knowledgeable in different fields to supplement his skills. Then, you have the architect's own staff. It is possible for architects as natural persons working in a single firm to specialize in a variety of ways. So many architects and firms, juridical persons specialize without losing the generalist approach of the architect or firm. Next is by association, consultation, or networking. Another common practice is consultation between an architect and a firm of other disciplines under the extended terms of the owner-architect agreement. Then let's go to the methods of compensation. So the architect's compensation is based on the architect's or architectural firm's talents, skill, experience, imagination, and on the type and level of professional services provided. So the compensation for pre-designed services may be based on one of the or more of the following. Number one is multiple or direct personal expenses, wherein this cost-based method of compensation is applicable only to non-creative work, such as accounting, secretarial, research, data gathering, preparation of reports, and the like. So this method of compensation is based on technical hours spent and not account for creative work, since the value of creative design cannot be measured by the length of time the designer has spent on his work. So the computation is made by adding all costs of technical services, man hours times rate, then multiplying it by a multiplier to cover overhead and profit. So the multiplier ranges from 1.5 to 2.5 depending on the office setup, overhead and experience of the architect, and complexity of the project. So other items such as cost of transportation, living and housing allowances of foreign consultants, out of town living and housing allowances of the local consultants, and the like are all to be charged to the client. So at the start of the commission, the architect shall make known to the client the rate of professionals and personnel who will be assigned to the project, and the multiplier has to be applied before agreeing on this method of compensation. So it only means less that before you're going to finalize your fees, you have to really discuss it first with your client. Okay, so it really takes a lot of courage, especially if you're a new architect, to discuss your payment terms to your client. But this is something that must be done. Okay, so this is the formula. Let us assume that A is the architect's rate per hour, C is the consultant rates per hour, then T is the rate per hour of technical staff, researchers, and others involved in the project. So AN, CN, and TN is equal to the number of hours spent by the architect, consultants, and staff. Then M is the multiplier to account for overhead and reasonable profit. Okay, so you must, since architecture class is also a business transaction, of course, you must also profit as long as it is reasonable for the effort that you have given. So the value may range from 1.5 to 2.5 depending on the setup of the architect's office and the complexity of the project. Then R is the reimbursable expenses such as transportation, housing and living allowance of consultant, transportation per dime, housing and living allowance of local consultants, and the technical staff assigned to places over 100 kilometers from the area of operation of the architect. Also have the cost of printing of extra set of drawings, reports, maps, contract documents, etc. Over the five copies submitted to the client, overseas and long distance calls, technical and laboratory tests, licenses, fees, taxes, and other similar cost items needed by the project. So direct cost is AN plus CN plus TN. Then the fee is direct cost times your multiplier. Then the total cost of service to the client is equal to fee plus R. Okay, let's go back to R. So R is the reimbursable expenses. Excuse me. Okay, so I think my throat is already tired from speaking class. So let's move on to professional fee plus expenses. So this method of compensation is frequently used when there is continuing relationship involving a series of projects. So it establishes a fixed sum over and above the reimbursement for the architect's technical time and overhead. So an agreement of the general scope of the work is necessary in order to set an equitable fee. Then you also have a lump sum or fixed fee. So this method may be applied to government projects since they entail more paperwork and time-consuming efforts. So take note, last, that if you're going to get involved in government projects, it's that there's a lot of paperwork to be done. Okay. Then 4.4, you have the per dime honorarium plus reimbursable expenses. So in some cases, a client may request an architect to do work which will require his personal time, such as attending project-related meetings, conferences, or trips, conducting ocular inspection of possible project sites, and conferring with others regarding prospective investments or ventures and the like. Then for these particular activities, the architect, as an agent of the owner, may be paid on per dime and honorarium plus out-of-pocket expenses such but not limited to travel, accommodations, and subsistence. Then you also have what you call the mixed methods of compensation. So in this one, the SPP provides for more than one method of compensation for the project. So each project should be examined to determine the most appropriate and equitable method of compensation. So you can also mix uh, the different methods of compensation for your project. As long as the important thing is you have discussed this with your client and then they have agreed to the method of compensation that you're going to do for a particular undertaking. Okay, so we're going to discuss next meeting about SPP document 202. So we'll end here at 201. Okay, which is about the pre-designed services. So if you have any questions or clarifications, class, you can send an email or send a message on my Facebook account. So I will always reply as long as I'm online. So see you next week, and kindly refer to our Facebook group page for the activity related to this lecture. Okay, so stay safe and see you next week.